Thank you for joining us at the 10th Annual Seattle Asian American Film Festival. My name is Bunthay Cheam, and I'm a co-founder of the Khmer Anti-Deportation Advocacy Group, an organization that provides support resources and guidance to our communities directly impacted by immigration, customs, and enforcement. And I'm moderating today's panel for Reflections and Refugee Stories Q&A that you're tuning in for today. Before we begin, I just wanted to offer a PSA. Immigration, Customs, and Enforcement, or ICE, is resuming physical apprehensions and detainments of people of Cambodian descent with orders of removal. If you have an order of removal, please find help at SEARAIDS.org. That's C-RAIDS. And C-RAIDS can kind of try to funnel you to a local organizations that's working on immigration. To kind of stay connected with the current work, you can follow at SEAFN official on Instagram, or CFIN on Facebook. That's Southeast Asian Freedom Network. Okay, so I guess I'll just roll right into it. I just wanted to start and ask y'all, we'll just go around the room if that's okay, share who you are, and then I'm kind of curious to know why is this story important for you to tell? And I'll kind of keep it moving. So again, I'll go to Louisa, and kind of please, if you could introduce yourself and tell us a bit about why your story is important.
Sure. My name is Louisa Fung So Yi. I am Chinese, Vietnamese, Canadian. I live on the unceded and stolen territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations in the Coast Salish peoples, which is known as Vancouver. Sorry, that's long, but this is something we do now as settlers on native land that has been stolen. So Canada is a big proponent, and in that, it's actually kind of related to my story because my film Hope and Grace was about refugees, but also about people who live here and whose land it is, and about sharing this space together as companions, friends, and not colonizers. So, and about sharing wisdom. And my cat, sorry, she just loves a good cameo. Yeah, so it's important to me because I, as a refugee, a generational refugee, my friendships and my upbringing is very much white, and understanding where my family comes from and the struggles they went through. I only ask those questions as an adult because you just kind of take it for granted, and then you realize how much trauma and that trauma gets passed down. So my film comes off like very happy at the end, which is nice, which is idealistic a little bit, but it also there's a little bit of that. There is a little bit of idealism of like our futures. So that's why that's why I made my film. But yeah, so that's me. I'll pass it to Lucy.
Hi, I'm Lucy, and so the question is, okay, who am I and why I made this film? My name is Lucy Zipan. I am second gen Mien American living in Oakland, California, and luckily I got to grow up in a community with other Mien refugee families, and I think that was a special part of my upbringing, and I think that's something. Well, one of the reasons why, I made my short film, My Name is Lai, because I, have always kind of searched for representation and stories about Mien community and our refugee experience, but oftentimes we're left out of the conversation, even in broader Southeast Asian conversations, or even just mainstream like Asian Americans storytelling. And so I made the short doc, My Name is Lai, about my grandmother. Her name is Lai. And I think I came up with that name because I'm like, ultimately, like, yeah, I want her face. I mean, it's just like one story and one of many faces. But I think ultimately I was like, people never know how to pronounce her names. And like, I think I just want that to stick. Like, this is my name. Like, our stories are important. And this is just one of the many stories. And it's a starting point, at least for me and my family and like the immediate community. And I'm just like so excited to be here with in a room with other like folks who have, you know, this background, and like to be able to have this conversation together. Oh, and I pass it on to Victoria. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Victoria. I am Chinese American. I grew up in Charlotte, North Carolina. And this story was, I feel like a story that I was very much invited into, and I'm very honored to collaborate with. And I think for me, something that's very important to me in my practice, in artistic practice, filmmaking, is making sure it's a process in which community is created in the making of it, and the accountability of a piece of work is in participation with everyone involved. So for me, it was quite an honor to be invited into the making of this story. And I think also a process in which I learned what it meant to make sure to honor the creation of community within each step and within each conversation, as we, got to know each other from almost complete strangers to people that I would say I will know for the rest of my life. And what it means to hold their stories and hold the story, I think also. So I'm a co-director with Vuti on the film After Images, Chinara Tom Philippe, what it means to hold someone's memory, not only for this generation, the friends and family that knew him, but also the next one. And I think thinking through that, I don't know, it's very, the stakes feel very high. And I think the creation of this story makes me think a lot about how I can be accountable to these people, not only for this film, but also for the rest of our lives together. And I'll pass it off to Vuti.
Hi, I'm Vuti Lai. And yes, I'm co-directing After Images, Chinara Tom Philippe with Victoria. It's funny, I guess, how do I answer who am I? And easier to answer how this story is important. But I was originally trained in architecture, and this is kind of our first filmmaking project. Victoria and I completely met each other by happenstance when this was kind of unfolding. And it very much arose out of a need to support this family who experienced a tragedy, losing their loved one who was murdered to police in Knoxville, Tennessee. And the more we learned about this story and the more the project developed, I guess it's always kind of been a living and breathing thing, trying to balance creating something that's shareable to a larger audience while also really respecting the trust that the family put in us to be able to tell that story. But I think one of the things that really stood out to me about this story was just the way in which it tied two very disparate geographic regions, like Providence, Rhode Island. This family, whose sibling brother moved down to Knoxville, Tennessee, and these two communities who really organized out of this, around this, the aftermath of this tragedy. And it really proved to me, like, even before all of the uprisings during the George Floyd protests, just like a really potent like moment in which we could document and really put forth and transmit like Black and Southeast Asian solidarity. And so I think as things are going, we're just trying to figure out, I guess, how to connect with others and really perhaps tell this story without necessarily reproducing the trauma that's embedded in it. And I'll pass it off.
Yeah. That leaves me. Thanks everyone. My name is Van Didavong. I'm a director of a short documentary called Elvis of Laos, which first off, I'm happy to be here with everyone. It's I got to see everyone's work, and I just love stories, no matter if it's narrative documentaries, and I think that's where it starts, and where you want to tell that story, what purpose. Sometimes you don't know, and for me, this story was based on my father, who, as you get older, he becomes I wish I was as friendly as I am with him now than back in the day. But so it was more just to kind of investigate just our lives. I'm a refugee. I escaped from Laos, and you have all those kind of experiences, and you try to make do. But a lot of the themes I like to explore is like love, lost, and pain. And but this one in particular is just about being an artist, and sometimes you're driven to do stuff that you don't know why. And I just wanted to see if that through the eyes of my father, and why he did stuff, and maybe my selfishly my niece, so she could, she likes to dance, and who doesn't like to dance? So I wanted to kind of investigate that. And so those are the little stories. So I'm glad to be a part of this refugee and legacy kind of group. So each story is great, and aspects of what it means for like searching for identity, place, and ultimately justice in certain aspects. So that's a little blip on my end. So anyone else want to hop in and ask questions?
I appreciate you, all y'all sharing all that. And if I didn't mention it already, we have filmmakers from about 4 films. The first one is My Name is Lai by Lucy Sepan. The second one is Elvis of Laos by Van Didavong. And then we have Hope and Grace by Louisa Fung. And then we have After Images, Janara Tom Philly Piep by Victoria Su and Pati Lay. Yeah, just to go back to you, Van, I think a lot of us can resonates with kind of this idea around like always wondering why. And I think if I heard correctly, always wondering why your parents are the way they are, or did the things they did. And it's I would imagine, I think for the general person, it's hard to like sit and ask those questions and really have a moment to really explore those things, because we're all just surviving. And I thought it was really interesting that you used and I was going to ask you, is that your niece or your daughter? Is that so that your niece has also a storytelling device? Can you say more about why, what was the idea around bringing her in, and say more about that?
Yeah, I think it's to investigate family. And you mentioned about intergenerational kind of thing. I think there's an innocence we all are born with, and there's this state of being artists that as we get older, we lose those things because we start to doubt things. This doesn't happen. We got to pay bills. I just love that idea of like always trying to be back as a kid. And then as my dad gets older, I think he becomes more of a kid. So it's just kind of funny, and of that aspect. And it was a selfish way for me to meet up with him each week and ask him uncomfortable questions. Sometimes he answers, sometimes he tells me to get out. But those are the things. I think that's the fun part of exploring, especially with documentary. You don't know where it'll take you. And for this, it took me to more of a personal place, and it gave me a selfish reason to be around my niece and my father. So, and then to figure out why I laugh so much at that Geico commercial when you start doing things like your dad, and you're like, dang, I am like my dad. That sucks. No, I'm joking, but it's great. So,
well, I'm glad you were persistent in tapping him, because it was a beautiful movie, beautifully shot for sure. Yeah, it was really dope movie. Thanks, yeah, man. There's something to be said about being able to explore kind of, especially the privilege of connecting with either your parents or even your grandparents, or even further, because all the trauma, like collectively in this space, some people don't have that. And so Lucy, for you, you were able to, that was you said that was your grandma, right?
Yeah, that was my grandma.
Yeah,
That
so
is my
that's so dope to be able to kind of document her story. Can you share a bit, like outside of the lines, so to speak, about how that experience was to be able to connect with your grandma in that way?
Yeah, I think it's a short film, but I think it I'm sure I'll look back and think that this is this is probably like the hardest project that I had to work on, just because it is so personal, and just finding a way to, well, I think ultimately I wanted to have this shared experience with her, where she can share what she felt comfortable. And then also myself as a filmmaker, how do I lend the, like, my filmmaking and telling her story in a way that, doesn't exploit her in any way, and like sensationalize anything, and also that also like doesn't like re-traumatize her, because I think oftentimes our elders, they don't talk about these stories because they are very painful. And um yeah, it took a long time and took a lot of reflection along the way, and um, took a lot of support from like fellow filmmakers, mentors, and things like that, to really go through the process of like you know um, having these conversations with my grandmother. And then the next difficult part was like cutting the film, right? Like that was because so many, like their stories are so complex. Like there's so many parts of it. It's like, how can you tell only a piece of a story without this other part? Because I think it does require like this really deep understanding of like history and these personal experiences. And I can't imagine, like, man, like you have your own personal like story as a refugee, and that I'm missing that first person experience, but I feel like we live that through our families a lot. um but yeah, I think it it was ultimately, I'm like, um I want this to be a healing experience for my grandmother. And I felt like she had a lot to say, because she's like, she was turning 30, I mean, 80, 86 at the time. And like, she was constantly talking about like what she wants to leave behind. Like, and so I was just like, dude, like, now is the time, because I can't imagine making any other film. And then what happens if my grandma is no longer here? So that would like really suck. So I'm so glad that I made it, and like, am like being able to share that with other people.
Has your grandmother seen the movie?
Yes, she has seen it, and it's so, I don't know if y'all experience it. Like, it's, I think it's hard for her to articulate like what it means to her to see her story like on a screen. Um, and so I think from time to time I'll like ask her again, and then but she does, like, I think she's excited for it, and that she knows it's out there, and she supports it. But I think, I don't know if many refugees have that, especially like older generation, if they have that like privilege to reflect in that way with like, I don't even know how to like articulate it, but I feel like there is just like the reflection is like unspoken, like, but you can tell like after she watches the film that something has shifted. Maybe something has been released a little bit, maybe just a little bit of the um, weight of carrying like these experiences. Yeah.
Yeah. That's yeah, I work with a lot of Viet and Khmer elders, and I definitely get the feeling, especially working with them, that they don't really have a lot of time to reflect.
Mhm.
Even like have the idea of like being in therapy or mental health because
Yeah.
been so busy surviving. And you brought up another point about how important it is to not re-traumatize her. And I heard that earlier, but from Victoria and Vitia, I just wanted to ask, like, kind of around that, like a lot of times we see stories that and or campaigns or things about amplifying folk stories that do put people on the stage that kind of forces them to go through the things and re-traumatizes them. Can you say a bit more about, you guys brought that up, so I'm kind of curious about, the importance behind kind of just making sure that you're not doing that.
I guess, well, Victoria, also feel free to hop in here. But Lucy, what you were talking about, I think in a kind of tangential way about when it came time to cutting down the film is really like hitting home for me right now in terms of where we're at in the process, because I think the stories are just so complex and layered. I find it difficult to hone in on one specific story, just like even kind of just taking a step back, that the name of the film is after someone who we've never met and didn't get a chance to, and we're really learning through the experiences of the community that loves him. But I think there's like so many different goals we're trying to manage between really like creating a portrait of him for his children and like his community after. I think the injustice of the story and kind of trying to continue seeking accountability and voicing that this family is willing to fight, and really trying to let people who are also impacted understand and see kind of their experience of this journey. But I think for a while we were really, and we're still debating this, because I think it's really, I think the ways in which police murders are kind of depicted follows a very sensationalized script if we follow it through the news media, which is kind of one of the ways in which we were reacting, like the ways in which he was depicted in the aftermath, and what was happening before. I think we were really trying to center the people and let the people we're interviewing, such as the family and the friends, and really allow them to speak, and really try to, I guess, convey the gravity and complexity. Like, I don't know, I'm kind of getting a little stuck, like, because I guess we still haven't worked it out. But I think another lens we were looking, if this also helps answer to the question, was just thinking about how this particular film would just be watched over and over. Like, if the family is definitely going to be watching this, like, making it something that isn't so hard for them to watch over time, something that perhaps allows them to have different thoughts about experiences they lived firsthand, but see it through different eyes, and maybe allow that conversation to continue.
Yeah. And I remember, like, when we were first starting to get to know the family and, really sit down and talk with them about how they were feeling in the aftermath, something that was very much on our minds was like this Ocean Vuong quote from an interview of like, how do you talk about American violence without recreating it, right? And I think we try to approach every interview with that mindset of like, this has the potential to put them back in one of the most painful moments maybe that they've experienced. And if we're opening that can of worms, like, how do we also try to move the conversation to also questions of hope and community and safety, and like you were saying, like healing as well. And I think that's something that was not an easy question to answer. And I think every single moment we were constantly trying to not do that. So when Voti was talking about like, what do we cut? Like, I think for a long time we shied away from even talking about what happened. What a lot of the activists we were talking with as well were always saying was like, in the aftermath, people always ask about the details, but that's the stuff that's like the most traumatizing. And instead of asking like what happened, let's ask why it happened. Let's like contextualize this in like this larger conversation in the communities that are all affected by this. And I think we tried to do that for a long time. And I think it was hard for us to do that, especially in the time of COVID, when everything was digital and like the organizing was like so hard to do across states, especially too during that time. But then as you see, there's some footage from Knoxville, Tennessee, when Sophia gets to travel down and like, see Philly's kids, like her nieces, nephews, and reconnect with the organizers there. And I think during that trip, we actually saw so much of that grief that was unaddressed because she is in survival mode, especially with that year with being so tough. And then, we were really scared for a long time of like, even going back and seeing his kids, like being a joyful thing, but also such a painful thing as well, because it's a reminder. And just thinking about like how violent a system is that makes seeing loved ones hurt so much, I think was just a reality that we didn't know how to handle. And even the organizers that do have experience losing family and friends to police violence, like also acknowledge like this is something that doesn't have an answer. And that's exactly why we have to sit with it and we have to try to come together around it. But I think what is something that was really beautiful during that trip that we did try to focus the film on was the way that Sophia found her voice, and found a lot of feelings of like that there was hope in the way that the organizers showed up for her and reunited with her, the way the family kind of surrounded her. And also by connecting with another family who had recently also lost someone to Knoxville PD, and just knowing that, they can understand each other's grief a little more and support each other in that process. And I think it was really beautiful seeing the way that she came on the trip and at the beginning was, really in it. And then by the end was honestly also like directing us, being like, can we shoot this? Can we meet here? Can we call up this person? And like just seeing that energy. I think it's something that like we still see ups and downs, because like healing is not a linear process. But even for a moment, if we can feel that and like continue that in the process of making this film and like continuing to work with the family, that's the goal. And that's what we were really trying to do with the process and still are.
Yeah, that was definitely a beautiful thing to see her, and I would say a lot of times in a lot of movements, right, it is her, she, women holding the movement, right, holding the space. It is femmes holding the space usually, right? And so that was a beautiful portrayal of what she's doing and continues to do, and then holding this trauma. And so just to pivot real quick to Louisa, like this trauma is connected all the way back to the conflict that brought many of us here in Southeast Asia. And so your film kind of explores kind of the experience, and it was based on a true story, I think I read, or based on
Inspired by true events. And it's
okay,
because
got
it's
it.
by my parents, but I don't really talk to them because of the diaspora and
Uh,
the trauma.
got it. Yeah,
Endured.
yeah. So I was, like you, that's front and center in your film, and just talking about, what Victoria and Bunthay said earlier about the support in Knoxville, around folks so that they can kind of stand up and be, and fulfill who they really are. You included like, and I'm assuming this is true, some an indigenous couple in there, and there's a part in the movie where I think she does a blessing with one of the couples. And so can you talk a bit about that, the importance of that, of how that might kind of help folks, or especially somebody that's just came and then has been traumatized, coming from a place of trauma?
Yeah, I mean, many cultures suffer from many different traumas and atrocities. And so this particular moment in Hope and Grace, is about, you know, having an argument, and then she's pregnant, and there's a smudging ceremony to clear the space of like negative energy. And so her indigenous neighbor and friend, who became her like her first friend, just helped kind of like clear the space for her. And it's kind of like a cross culture thing, right? Like in the scene there was incense, and there was like longing for home and family, and not having that, and that feeling that loss, and then having this woman, this friend, come and welcome her and help clear the space and clear, you know, some of that loneliness for her. And it was kind of like this duel, I know, like super subtle, but also kind of on the nose, between the incense and the smudging of the sage. Was kind of like kind of a parallel of ceremonial things that we do as people to help ourselves and heal. And the two women, so like unlike the your me documentaries, which is amazing, because of my own personal history, like I don't talk to my parents because of lots of reasons. Very like opposite of model minority, and so this was kind of like my exploration of what my parents were like when they first came over, and kind of like I said, is like an idealized version of who they were, and like before all the shit hit the fan, right? Like I'm like, oh, what if it was like a happy story, you know, like what if all the happy things? And so in real life it was a Portuguese family actually who befriended, which is why my name is Louisa. And that's how like the whole film kind of started. It was like, how do I this story of these two women becoming friends. And nobody really talks about what happens after you land in a safe country. You know, like there's a little bit of discussion about like, oh, I don't have like my medical degree anymore, and I'm now a, you know, cab driver. But really, like the actual like the nitty gritty of what it is to come to a different country without the language, being quite alone, having come through a lot of trauma and war, and you don't even know what happened in before. All you see is the results. And and so it was like the loneliness, and really like the connection. I was really like wanting, and then the full circle of it as well, where, you know, this refugee story isn't by itself, right? We all live this refugee story, and at the end of the film, it's like fake found footage, where we they sponsor the original family sponsors an immigrant family from the Syrian refugees, right? And so it's kind of like, you know, this is our home together. As long as we're doing it together, you know, you'll always have people, even if it's not the same skin tone or whatever. We understand each other because we're all human. So.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You know, I was kind of curious, and you know, now that you say that it was originally a Portuguese family, and I kind of curious on like kind of what was your inspiration around including like an indigenous couple. And like I was kind of thinking in my mind, this is just me thinking to myself, is like, you know, how do I, you know, and I ask this myself sometimes, like how do I see myself in my place as a refugee on stolen land, right? And so I'm kind of curious, like, yeah, more understanding more about why you chose an indigenous couple.
Um, so Sarah Dawn and Kendall are wonderful actors, and basically the original story is Portuguese, and I didn't even really know until like much later in my life that Portugal had actually colonized Vietnam. Like I don't know how I didn't know that, but I didn't know that. And so when I was writing this, I wasn't really focusing on that aspect of things. I was more focused on like this dichotomy between people who are settlers, and others who are like who were on this land and been invaded. So it kind of alluded. I mean, I alluded it very subtly, hopefully, that they weren't happy about it, which is like kind of like a the sentiment that, you know, a lot of like landowners have about refugees and immigrants. But, you know, their culture is about, you know, like about taking care of each other, taking care of the land, and being guardians, and so that kind of aspect was why I chose to write indigenous um, families into this, and also like representation. like, we don't need more European representation on camera. So I wanted to also like use this platform to put more Indigenous people on film, and then put the story like be parallel to each other. Um, and that they support each other, and that we're all in it together. That's not so separate, so like divisive. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah, definitely representation is definitely important, and it makes me think about Lucy's film. And I think a lot of people think about Southeast Asia and they just think of Khmer, Cambodian, Vietnam, or Laos, but we know that there's tons of different ethnic groups. So Lucy, and you said a bit about the importance of being able to kind of like amplify stories of like folks that haven't been heard. How yeah, tell us about that. Tell us about the importance of being able to tell a Mian story.
Yeah, I think yeah, like there are so many like ethnic groups like everywhere, and I think as I was exploring this film and just like my grandmother's story, I realized that like one of the ways that stateless people or countryless people could find some representation is just through like personal stories. And it took me a while to like to recognize the power in personal stories, in oral traditions. Like those are just as important as like history that's written in books and things like that. And so that's when I was like, okay, since there are like really like limited history documented by like Mian folks, like this is a really accessible way, like through film, because like my grandmother Lai, she doesn't read or write, but she has this like amazing memory. Like she's like the family historian. She remembers, she tries to retain all like the family history and like as much as she can, like just in her memory. And I know memory changes, but for what it's worth, that is what exists, like for me to understand her experience and how it relates to my identity and kind of my place in the world. And so I think that's why it's like super important to like document these like personal oral narratives. They're just as important as any other person's perspective, uh, especially like even more important than the colonizers like perspective, storytelling. And so I think like just more of these. And I love that like that there's more filmmakers like making films like this and telling their family's story, even when a lot of general like public audience, they're like, why is this important? How is this going to impact my life? Well, it's not always about you, like we're trying to heal ourselves and our communities, and this is where we're going to start. And as long as this is important to the person telling the story and perhaps their family and their like immediate community, I think like it really is up to us. So like even if like you're not gonna like send it off to a film festival or whatever, if you have elders in your family, like like take a moment and just like find out, because I think so many of them don't have anyone to like tell, and so my grandmother was so gracious to be able to try to dig deep enough in front of the camera and like and to share her story. And some stories I've heard so many times and some things are new. So yeah, so I think that's yeah, so I'm really glad that
Yeah,
we did
that part about telling stuff orally, that's how it's been done, right? Like we gotta
yeah.
like, center like white led narratives with
Yeah,
storytelling.
man. Like forget
Um,
about that. Like
yeah.
but yes, but yeah.
Then there's a part in your film where you talk about coming, you were born in Vientiane, I think it says, and you
Yeah.
came and you were separated from it, I think your entire family.
Yeah.
Looking back on that, tell us more about kind of looking back now in hindsight, how that may have impacted you or your thoughts now.
Yeah, definitely. I know, like, my dad at the time was at the States, and then because of the war, basically there's no communication. So I was stuck back in the as a baby, I think from when I until I was like 3, 4 years old to cross over to the Mekong to go to the refugee camp. It's what it's an interesting kind of story because I don't remember it. You just hear it from past from people. It's not like this is and I think Louisa, you might have said something, or someone had mentioned that to live it, the trauma, I think you keep going. Some people don't like, obviously all the stories here, people don't like to talk much about it because it's reliving that trauma. But during for me personally, going through it, it affects your outlook. And then it kind of goes back to that whole thing. If you could get through this, well, take big swings, become an artist, become things. Don't listen to everything. What's the worst thing that could happen? What the worst thing that could happen? Step on a landmine. It's game over. So enjoy it. And I think I had a aunt who, it was only till recently too, it was like 5 years ago, where she was like, yeah, just don't sweat the small stuff and that kind of stuff. And it's easy to listen to, hard to implement, because we get into a whole thing, but then after time, you go through it. And that's why I think filmmaking, with all the stories that they're here, the filmmakers in this panel, you could see how personal it is, like Lucy's story with your family, your grandmother, and also everyone here, even working with actors and not wanting to exploit things, being respectful to the story. I think that's the main goal. So every time, like if I have any questions about things, I always go back to what's the story, So whenever I'm lost, what's the theme? That's my guiding light. So because we always get like pulled in many directions so with that, yeah. In terms of being a refugee, I think just learning how to keep going, work hard, be nice,
Yeah.
treat each other, pick your neighbor up, easy things to say, hard to implement, but one step at a time. And I think that's why with everyone's stories, I could see that it's about others, but it's ultimately about ourselves. We're trying to figure out ourselves in it, how we fit into our lives, the community, and each other. So it's a great program of stuff. So
yeah, definitely. And then your film, Louise's film, Lucy's film, at least, like really talk about kind of, and includes why the impact of the conflict and the role that the U.S. had in the reasons why our families came here. And for Victoria and Vati, your film talks about what's happening now, right? And a lot of times the way in which, like, anti-Asian hate is kind of seen is a very kind of one-on-one type of thing, and this community versus that community, this person versus that person. But you talked a bit about it earlier, about how this ties to the impact of state violence, and I in the way in which y'all draw kind of some of the same types of violence that Philly's parents might have endured, and tie it back to what happened to Philly in itself. Could you share a bit about maybe why, like, and this may not be the truth, but it's a feeling I have sometimes, why folks may not be able to tie like anti-Asian violence to like what the state is doing to society?
I think I know what you mean, but Could you also try rephrasing it too?
Yeah, I think, like if I ask my mom, like, you know, violent, what is violence? And she'd probably say something hitting you or beating you up. But she would never say that violence is the way in which like white supremacy creates environments or create conditions, or the lack of conditions that allow for like this type of violence to happen, right? Like if the patriarchy says this, that, and the third about Asian women, would there be a guy showing up at the spa and shooting up people? So I think the difference between, tying it to what you see every day around in your space, or and also being able to kind of connect it with like the institution or the state. I watched y'all's film and I kind of read kind of the what y'all wrote as it pertains to a question that was asked when y'all entered the film, and you spoke to this a bit about like state and institutional violence, and I was kind of wondering if y'all could expand a bit more on that.
Yeah, I think I could give it a shot. I also realized way at the beginning, I was really focused on trying to not say anything Victoria said, and I just didn't say anything besides myself, besides what I studied. But maybe a quick recap. I'm Khmer and Chinese, raised in Providence, but I also have family in France, so I kind of bounced back and forth. But I think I was raised by refugees, so I think it made complete sense to me in the time that kind of we were approached to take on this project, why like the American war in Southeast Asia connects directly to this, and why it makes it, although no one should lose their lives to the state, like why it makes it extra fucked up that like this story had to happen that way, or not that it had to happen that way, but that this story panned out that way. I don't know if per se we're focused on trying to, and we grappled with this too for a while, like if we were trying to draw the connection completely between that history, because I think there was like a certain level where like, although we recognize like the connections between all of these larger systems and historical events that created these conditions for violence and white supremacy to be perpetuated and for us to live in that and what that entails, I think, yeah, we for a while we're really trying to hone in on what audiences, although the family like expressed to us that they wanted this story shared with everyone, that we didn't necessarily, for instance, want to create the full context why, like, for instance, a particularly white audience or families who aren't impacted by this need to be filled on or sold on the fact that this was wrong. But I think, right, although I guess because of just like the duration of the format of like a documentary film, we couldn't necessarily directly tackle that. I think we tried to embed it in the ways in which we were editing or choosing to depict the family members. And it kind of ties back to, I think, that earlier question of like, how are you striving to not recreate the trauma in the way you're depicting people? And I think amongst all of us, I would assume like really trying to root the representations of these figures who aren't represented by the media and very like in their full dignity and humanity, like framing them as epically as we see them for the audience to make that connection. And I think all of us to a certain degree are engaging with like that power of like the image and the film, and like it's not even like you have to imagine or like intuit it, it's what we've curated for you to see. And I think part of it was, yeah, rooting it in like showing like really powerful, respectful portraits of people struggling against these larger systems. But also, I think, although we're working on our political education too, trying to experiment with abolitionist image making. And like, for instance, just because that the police murdered him, we don't need to necessarily be depicting the police in a very neutral way. I think really trying to be selective about like whether like, do we need to show a cop car on screen, or if we did need to show one, how should it be portrayed? Probably on fire, to be honest. Really trying to, I don't know, center images. And I think, Von, in the way you were kind of tangentially talking about it, like images that make us, I guess, look past the reality we're like known, like makes us try to think past it. And I think even in the interview questions, we weren't really able to depict this in its fullness yet, but like we were centering ourselves on questions like, what is justice in this case, and what does a safer world look like, and even ranging from people like the family who's just reacting to the tragedy of this loss versus like the grassroots activists on the ground who've been working on this for a while, like just seeing how everyone, including us, are struggling with trying to imagine a world past police violence. I don't know if that kind of gets to it, but if you wanted to.
Yeah, definitely. And I just want to give space for Victoria to also chime in if you'd like to.
Yeah, I think like with those questions that we asked, we would ask that at the end of every interview. And I think it speaks volumes that, you know, that question was answered with, like, you know, people just going like, man, like, I don't know. And I think I don't know, it's interesting in making a film. One of you touched on like the idealism of it too. What, like for us, how can we center it on something that's so rooted in reality, but also end on a note of hope and end on a dream and end on something that shows a possibility or an imagination to dream with. And I think being able to witness even the smallest moments of joy and working with this family over like almost 3 years now, and seeing them right after it happened and just like in those first interviews, it took a year and a half, 2 years for us to even like be able to hang out with them and like see them really like back with themselves and smiling. So those moments of joy, and like we received feedback too, and this speaks to, you know, us constantly questioning like, who are we making this for? And we've received feedback of like, sometimes it seems like they're so happy, and I don't see the pain as much. And I think for us, we realize like we want to hold on to those moments of joy, those moments where, you know, those kids are happy, they're seeing their aunt, they're able to like be in that emotion of love and care, because those are the moments that I think will like lead us forward. And those are the moments where it feels the most tangible of like what that comfort and safety and love and community can really feel like. And so I think that's something we try to ground it all in.
Well, thank you for that. And your film makes me think about something that the community over here in the Northwest is dealing with right now. There was a young Khmer man that was shot and killed in 2019, and just right before that, there was a law that was passed in the state that kind of, depending on how you look at it, lowered or raised the bar for you know, cops to be prosecuted. So the cop that killed him is going to be the first under this new law to be prosecuted, and that's ongoing right now. The trial keeps getting postponed, but the community here is also going through something like that as well. I wish we could keep going. It's really dope conversations, really dope people, but we have to end it here. Before we leave, I just wanted to say, check out the other great programs playing at SAAFF right now, available virtually from March 3rd to the 13th at bit.ly or bit.ly /SAAFF 2022. Again, that was bit.ly /SAAFF 2022. Again, thank you, all the great energy, all the dope filmmakers, all the marvelous storytellers in this space. And I appreciate y'all, for real. Thank you so much.